everyone, this is the intro YouTube assignment for CMTC 280 database programming, and in this YouTube we're going to install the software that you're going to be using throughout the course. There are two software packages we're going to be installing. The first is called Visual Paradigm. We're going to be installing the Community Edition of that software, specifically version 12. We're going to be using Visual Paradigm earlier on in the course for our conceptual database design. Then we're going to install MySQL Community Server, and we're going to be installing version 5.6 of MySQL Community Server. And this is the actual database management system that we're going to be using throughout the course for our physical database design, and we're also going to be using it to create our physical databases and our database structures. Now, after we install both of these software packages, we're going to use them a little bit. We're going to create a couple of data models. We're also going to create a small database using MySQL Community Server. And throughout the YouTube, there are going to be spots where I ask you to take screenshots of what we're doing. So at those spots in the YouTube, you might want to stop the YouTube, take the screenshot, save it off somewhere, make sure that you have it, because you're going to be submitting those screenshots as part of your deliverable for this assignment. Okay, so let's get started with Visual Paradigm. We're going to go out to its download site. And by the way, the URLs for all of these download sites are available to you in the PowerPoint presentation that we were just looking at. That PowerPoint presentation is located out on the portal on our course shell in the class material page. So you have access to these URLs right now. So anyway, this is the Visual Paradigm URL where we're going to download Visual Paradigm, again, the Community Edition, version 12. So we're going to start the download process. We're going to be prompted to save its install executable. So we're going to save it. I'm going to save it out into my downloads directory. And this is going to take a few minutes, so please bear with me. Okay, so it looks like the install executable is fully saved into my downloads directory. So I'm going to go out to the downloads directory, and there it is. I'm going to run the install executable. And once the install wizard starts up, I'm basically going to next through its series of screens, accepting all of the defaults. And that's what I would recommend you do too. Okay, so here's the install wizard. I'm simply going to next through the screens, accepting all of the defaults. And we're going to install Visual Paradigm. Okay, we're actually going to start up Visual Paradigm right now. So in the center of the screen there's a radio button that says Visual Paradigm 12.0 underneath of Start the Installed Product. You want to make sure that radio button is checked, and then you can push on Finish and Visual Paradigm will start up. Okay, and this is what Visual Paradigm looks like. Okay, now you may not have reached this point that I'm at right now. You may be looking at a screen right now that says thank you for installing Visual Paradigm Community Edition, and it's asking you to input your name and an email address so that you can be sent an activation key for the software. You should follow along with that. You should input your name, you should input your address, and you should get an activation key. Okay, and at that point, an activation key will be emailed to you at the email address that you provided. So you can go into your email account, open up your email, and you should see an email from Visual Paradigm. Go into that email, and inside of it, you should see an activation key. And then what you want to do is you want to input that activation key into Visual Paradigm. Okay, so probably most of you at this point are going to be prompted to go get an activation key, okay, and then input the activation key into the Visual Paradigm software, and you should do that. Okay, after you've done that, then you will see the Visual Paradigm software that I'm looking at right now. Okay, this is what the software package looks like. And again, we're going to be using Visual Paradigm for our database modeling. So if you look over in the left-hand side of the software, sort of at the top, there's a window. It's called Diagram Navigator. And there are a bunch of folders. There's a UML diagrams folder. Well, we're really not interested in that folder, so you can close it if it was open, or just keep it closed. Nor are we interested in requirements modeling or SysML. We're interested in database modeling, so you want to open that up. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating entity relationship diagrams, okay, using Visual Paradigm. Okay. What we want to do first, though, is we want to create a new project. Okay. So at the top of Visual Paradigm, select File, and then select New Project, and we're going to name the project School, and we're going to push the Create Blank Project button. Okay, and there underneath of the Diagram Navigator you can see at the top the project is named School now. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to create an entity relationship diagram. So in the Navigator, select or highlight Entity Relationship Diagram, then do a right click and select New Entity Relationship Diagram. Okay, what you want to do is you want to give your diagram a name. Okay, and under Diagram Name, right now it says Entity Relationship Diagram 1. You want to change that to School, and then underneath of Data Model, you want to select Conceptual. Okay, you want to select Conceptual, and then you can click away. Okay, somewhere in the center of this editor. This is an editor where we're going to be creating an actual diagram, an entity relationship diagram. And it's going to be a pretty basic one. It's going to have two entities, two tables, and each of the tables is going to have 3 or so columns. Okay, so let's get created. In this editor area, we're going to construct an entity relationship diagram named School. Okay, so over on the left side of the editor, you see a bunch of buttons. These are different buttons for various things that we're going to include in our diagram. Okay, and what you're going to do is you're going to drag them over into the diagram. We're going to start off with an entity. Okay, so an entity represents a table, and we're going to talk about the details of what an entity relationship diagram is, and an entity and a relationship and all of that in class. For now, we just want to make sure that the software is functioning properly. Okay, so what you want to do with the entity button is you want to do a left mouse click, and you want to hold the left mouse button down, and you want to drag your cursor over into the editor area, and then release the left mouse button. And you should see something that looks like this. This is an entity. We want to give it a name. We're going to call it Advisor. Okay. So now what we're going to do to this entity, this table, is we're going to add 3 columns to it. Okay, so to add a column, okay, to an entity, you select it, you do a right click, and then you select New Column from the button that pops up. And we're going to call this new column advisor_ID, okay, in all caps. And we're going to add 2 more columns in the same exact fashion. The first one is going to be called advisor_FName for first name. And the third column is going to be called advisor last name. Okay, so we're going to add a third column, advisor last name, L name, all uppercase. Okay, now what we're going to do, we have 3 columns in our entity. We're going to change them a little bit. Starting off with the advisor ID, we're going to change the characteristics of that column. So we're going to select it, we're going to do a right click, and from within the pop-up that appears, we're going to select Open Specification. And down at the bottom, we're going to include this column in the primary key, and that's all we're going to do. We're going to include it in the primary key and push on OK. Then for the other 2 columns, what we're going to do is we're going to select them too, do a right mouse click, select Open Specification, and at the top, we're going to change their type from integer to varchar, and we're going to make their length 25. And that's it. We're going to do that same thing for the advisor and last name. Okay, so there's our first entity. We're going to create another one. Okay, so go over into the left-hand side of the editor where all these buttons are and do a left click on entity again and drag your cursor over into the editor and then release the left mouse button, and we're going to call this entity student, and we're going to give it very similar columns, very similar attribute, student ID, student first name, and student last name, and we're going to set them up in the same exact fashion as we set up the advisor columns. So let's get those added. Okay, we have them added. Now let's change their characteristics, and we're going to set these columns up in the same way that we set up the columns on the advisor entity. Their characteristics are going to be set up in the same exact fashion. So the student ID is going to be included in the primary key, and the student first name and last name, we're going to change their type from integer to varchar and their length to 25. Okay, and now we have 2 entities. Each entity has 3 or so columns in it. Now what we're going to do, and you can move these around, you can shift them around however you want. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to create a relationship between the 2 entities. It's actually going to be a one-to-many relationship. If you look over on the left-hand side of the editor, there's a button for one-to-many. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to push it. You're going to do a left click. Okay, but then you're going to move your cursor so that it's over top of the advisor entity. You're going to do a left click, but you're going to hold the left mouse button down, and you're going to drag your cursor over so that it's on top of the student entity, and then you're going to release the left mouse button. And this window is going to pop up, and that's fine. You want it to pop up, okay? And then you can push on OK. And there you can see we have a relationship now. It's a one-to-many relationship between the advisor and the student. So an advisor has many students. That's the relationship. So what we can do is we can change that relationship a little bit. We can select it, do a right mouse click, open up the specification, and give it a name. Has. Okay, so in this window, relationship specification at the top, there's a field for name. You can change that to has, push on OK, and now the relationship has a name. So 2 entities, and they're related to one another in a one-to-many relationship. So make sure that you save this project. Okay, so go up to the File drop-down option, save the project. Okay, and there's a folder that's created when you install Visual Paradigm VP Projects. Mine is saved, okay, underneath of my C directory, C users, Susie's excuse me, Susie, My Documents, VP Projects. That's where all your visual paradigm projects are going to be saved. Okay, you want to make sure you know where to go and get the files in that folder, because you're going to be submitting, you're going to be submitting this VPP file as part of this assignment. That'll be one of your deliverables. And by the way, you can see that the visual paradigm files are going to have the extension .vpp. Okay, so you can go ahead and save that project. Okay, that's visual paradigm. Okay, now before we leave visual paradigm, what I'd like to ask you to do at this point is I'd like you to capture a screenshot, okay, of this screen with the school entity relationship diagram. So take a screenshot, save it off somewhere, and next we're going to continue on with MySQL. Okay, but before we can install MySQL, okay, in order to use its graphical user interface, which is called MySQL Workbench, we have to download and install the Visual C++ redistributable packages for Visual Studio 2013. And this is all so that we can use MySQL Server's graphical user interface, and we do want to use it. So let's download this redistributable package. Okay, and the one that we want to select is VC redist_x64, okay, for 64 bits. Okay, so select that package, that executable, and then push on next, and we'll be prompted to save it. And I'm going to save it into my downloads directory. And that was quick, it's out there. So now what we're going to do, there it is, I'm in my downloads directory. There's the install executable, okay, for the redistributable package for Microsoft Visual C++. I'm going to run it. And install the software. Okay, and that was quick. Okay. So now I can proceed to install MySQL Community Server. So let's go out to its download site. Okay, and this is the dev.mysql.com download site that I showed you in the PowerPoint presentation. Okay, so this is your starting point. What you're going to want to do is scroll down a little bit, and we are going to be installing version 5.6 of MySQL Community Server. And what we're going to download is the MySQL installer MSI. Okay, so first of all, you want to select your platform. Okay, my platform is Windows. Okay, and then I'm going to download the installer. Okay, it takes me to this page. Okay, and I'm going to scroll down again a little bit lower, and I'm given two choices, two choices for the installer. And what we're going to select is the second one, the MSI installer community, MySQL installer community -5.6-22, not the web community, but the community. Okay, it's the second one, so we're going to download that. And we're not going to log in, or we're not going to sign up. There's a hyperlink at the bottom of this page. It says no thanks, just start my download. You're going to click that hyperlink, and you're going to be prompted to save the installer. And I'm going to save it into my downloads directory. And this is going to take a few seconds, so please bear with me again. Okay, so it looks like the installer is fully downloaded into my downloads directory. I'm going to go out into the downloads directory, and there it is, okay, at the top. So I'm going to run it and double click on it. Okay, so let's go through the install wizard. First, we're going to accept the license agreement. Okay, and in the type of setup, we're actually going to select custom. Okay, so at the bottom, we're going to select a custom setup and then push on next. Okay, and then in the select products and features, okay, underneath of MySQL servers, we're going to open up MySQL servers, and underneath of MySQL Server 5.6, we're going to select MySQL Server 5.6.22-x64, so we're going to add that. That's a product that we're going to add. Underneath of applications, we're going to open up MySQL Workbench. We're going to open up MySQL Workbench 6.2, and we're going to select MySQL Workbench 6.2.4-x64 for 64 bits. Okay, and then we're also going to add MySQL Notifier. So we're going to open up that folder, MySQL Notifier 1.1, and we're going to select it, MySQL Notifier 1.1.6. We're going to add that. We're also going to add MySQL for Excel. So open up its folder and then select MySQL for Excel 1.3.3. And then underneath of MySQL Utilities, we're going to add MySQL Fabric 1.5.3 and MySQL Utilities 1.5.3. We're going to add that as well. We're not going to add MySQL for Visual Studio. Okay. If you scroll down a little bit more underneath of documentation, we're going to open up MySQL documentation 5.6, and we're going to add it. And then scroll down a little bit further underneath of samples and examples, open up samples and examples 5.6 and add samples and examples 5.6. So these are the products and the features that we're going to install. Okay, so I'll give you a minute on this screen to make sure that you have all of the right products and features added. Okay, and then we're going to click the next button. Okay, and it's telling us that it's going to install all these products that we wanted it to install. So we're going to click on execute, and at this point it's installing all of the products and features one at a time. It's going through and installing them, and you can see this takes a little while. So hang in there with me one more time. Okay, so all of the products that we wanted to add have now been installed. I'm going to push on the next button. Okay, and then I'm simply going to push on the next button. Again, we're going to configure the products. Okay, in this window, underneath of type and networking, we're not going to make any changes, but what we are going to do at the bottom is we're going to check the Show Advanced Options checkbox. Okay, so at the bottom of this window that has a heading of type and networking, don't make any changes, but at the bottom there's a checkbox that says Show Advanced Options. Make sure you check it, and then push the next button. And what we're going to do in this window is we're going to create our password for MySQL, and you're going to want to remember this password. So write it down. Write it down. You want to remember this password because when you start up MySQL Community Server, you're going to be prompted for it. Okay, so type it in now, whatever you want your password to be. But please remember it. Please remember what this password is. You're going to need it. Write it down somewhere. Okay. Now what we're going to do underneath of MySQL user accounts, we're going to add a user. You can give it whatever username you want. I'm going to call mine Susie. Underneath of host, you're going to select local host. You're going to leave the role as DB admin. Authentication is MySQL, but then you're going to create another password. And as a matter of fact, it can be the same password if you want that you used in the previous window. Okay, it can be the same one. That's what I do. Okay, remember that password. Okay, and then you can push on OK. And then once you've set up the password and you've added a user, you can push next. Okay. In this window, you're not going to make any changes, except you are, I'm sorry, I lied. There's a checkbox in the middle of the window that says Start the MySQL Server at System Startup. You don't want to do that. You don't want to have MySQL Server start up every time you start up your laptop or your computer. You want to start up MySQL Server yourself. Okay, so make sure this checkbox is not checked in the center of the window. You don't want to have that checked. Then you can push on Next. And in the advanced options, you don't have to make any changes. You can push on Next. Okay, and then you can push on Execute. Okay, and then you can push on Finish. Okay, and we're back to the product configuration window. We're going to push on Next again. And in the Connect to Server at the bottom, what you want to do is you want to push the check button. And hopefully it says Connection Successful. And you push on the Next button again. And then you push on Execute. And that's it. At this point, you can push on the Finish button. Oh, I'm sorry, we go back to the product configuration one more time, push Next again, and that's it. Okay, so I was off by one screen. I apologize for that. But what we want to do, the installation is complete. Excuse me, so now what we want to do is we want to start up MySQL Workbench. Okay, so we're going to push on Finish, and MySQL Workbench is going to start up. Now, MySQL Workbench is the graphical user interface into MySQL Community Server, and this is what it looks like. Okay, this dark screen is what MySQL Workbench looks like. This is the software application where we're going to be creating our physical database models, and we're also going to be creating our physical databases. Okay, so what you want to do in the upper left-hand corner is you want to push the local instance. Okay, and you want to type in your password. Remember, I said you're going to be prompted for your password, so you want to type it in and push on OK. Okay, and the configuration of MySQL Workbench changes a little bit. Okay, one area where you want to become familiar going to on the left-hand side of the window, underneath of Instance, there's a hyperlink for Startup and Shutdown. Okay, this is where you would go to stop MySQL Server when you're done using it and you want to exit the software, exit MySQL Workbench. Before you exit, you should really stop MySQL Server from running. Okay, so it's from within this tab where you would do that. Again, that's under Startup and Shutdown. It brings up this tab and you can push this button to stop MySQL Server, and you should really do that before you exit MySQL Workbench. Okay. But what we want to do right now is we want to create a physical database model. So underneath of the File drop-down option, we're going to select New Model. And this window is going to pop up. Okay, and this is a starting point for creating a physical database model. And we've got a lot of windows here. We've got a description editor. We've got this main model overview window. Over on the left-hand side, we have modeling and a modeling additions window. If there's too much clutter, you can get rid of this modeling additions by pushing on this little icon in the upper right-hand corner, and that removes that. Gives you a little more space. Okay, but what we want to do first is we want to start off first of all by changing the name of this physical schema, they call it, but it's a database model. We want to change the name of it. So what we do is we do a right click where it says MyDB. You do a right click over that and you say edit schema. And at the bottom you should see a window, a new window that pops up. It says MyDB schema. We want to change the name, okay, from MyDB to school. We're going to call it school. Okay? So we're going to change the name of the schema from MyDB to school. Okay, and then what we're going to do at the top, there is a button for Add Diagram. Okay, we're going to double click on that, and that's going to bring up yet another window. And it's in this window where we're actually going to be creating our entity relationship diagram. Okay, but before we do that, I want you to go back to that previous tab. At the top it says MySQL Model. And what we're going to do is select the icon at the top that says EER diagram. Select that, do a right click, and then say rename diagram. And we're going to change its name to school as well. Okay, so the schema is named school, the diagram is named school. Okay, and we're going to go into the diagram now, and we're going to create a physical entity relationship diagram. Okay, it's going to have two tables, and it's going to have one relationship between the tables. Okay, so and by the way, if we want to close off this modeling additions window, we can do that too by clicking on the icon in the upper right hand corner that I'm pointing to. Give us a little bit more room to create this physical entity relationship diagram. Okay, so we want to start off by adding a table to the diagram. So this is the editor area. On the left hand side of the editor area, again, a bunch of buttons. In the center there's a button for a table. So you do a left mouse click and you place your cursor over somewhere into the diagram where you see all the grid lines, and you do another left mouse click, and there you have a table. It's called table 1. We don't want it to be called table 1. Okay, we want to change that. So double click on it, and at the bottom of the editor there's a new window that opens up, and in that window we can give that table a name. We're going to call it advisor, and in this window we can begin creating columns in the table. And actually you can make the table larger so that it's a little bit easier to see. Okay, you can make it wider and you can make it longer. Okay, but now what we want to do is we want to begin adding columns to the table. Well, there's one in there right now for ID advisor, but we want to change the name of that. We want it to be advisor _ ID in all uppercase, and we do want it to be the primary key. PK stands for primary key. That checkbox is checked because we want that column to be the primary key. NN stands for not null. Okay, we're going to leave that just as it is. We're going to add another column though for advisor first name, and it's going to be a varchar. And let's change that from varchar 45 to varchar 25. Okay. And again, you can make these tables in the diagram wider and longer so that you can see all of the columns a little bit better. We're going to add another column for advisor last name. Okay, and we'll make it a varchar 25 as well. Okay, but there's our advisor table now. Okay, we're going to create another table. Okay, so we can close this window for the advisor table down at the bottom. What we're going to do, so we're going to go over into the left hand side of the editor where the buttons are. We're going to click on the table button again, place our cursor somewhere over in the editor, and do a left click again. There we have another table, but it's named table 1, doesn't have any columns yet, so we're going to double click on it, and we're going to name it student. Okay, so we're going to have the same tables, the student table and the advisor table. So the student table is going to have 4 columns. First one's going to be the student ID, okay, and it's going to be the primary key, and it's going to be not null, okay. And the student table is also going to have a first name column, which is going to be varchar 25. It's going to have a student last name column, which will be varchar 25. And by the way, you can see the way that I'm editing these columns is by simply placing my cursor in the field that I want to edit. Okay. I am going to add, and I can make the table bigger. Okay, I can make it bigger. Okay, so I can see all the columns and their definitions. So I can make it bigger. I am going to add another column here for advisor ID. And it's going to be not null, and I want to make sure that its type is int. Okay, its type is int. So the student table has 4 columns, the advisor table has 3 columns. Okay. Now what I want to do in this window down at the bottom of the editor, the student window, I want to go over, and right now we're in the columns tab. I want to go over into the foreign keys tab. And what I want to do is I want to create a foreign key, and this is actually going to create a relationship between the 2 tables. And I'm going to call it student underscore advisor underscore foreign key. And underneath of reference table, I'm going to select advisor. And underneath of column, I'm going to select advisor ID. And underneath of referred column, I'm going to select advisor ID. Just like that. Okay, so I'm setting up a foreign key relationship between the advisor and the student table, and you can actually see it in the diagram now. Okay, above you can see the line, the one-to-many line, okay, between the tables. That's a relationship. Okay, so one advisor has many students. You can close the student tab down below. Okay, now what we can do is we can give this relationship a name. And you do that, it's sort of a funny way to do it by adding a comment. Okay. Oh, actually, it's a new text object. Okay. In the buttons on the left-hand side of the editor, there's a button for new comment. You want to push that, and you want to place your cursor above that relationship line in the diagram, and then do a left click again, and you have a text box. You want to double click on that, and a window opens up at the bottom. And the text, for that text right now it says text. Well, we want to change that to has. So one advisor has many students, and that depicts the relationship between the 2 tables. Okay, so now we want to save this model. This is it, we're done. Okay, we want to save the model, so we're going to do File, and then Save Model As. And I would actually recommend saving this model somewhere out, like on your C drive. I have a folder for Chestnut Hill. I'm going to save it out there. Okay, I'm going to call it school. Okay, and it's going to get saved as a .mwb file. So your Microsoft Workbench files that contain your physical database models, okay, are going to be saved as .mwb files. Okay, so let's save this. It's called school.mwb. Okay, we're going to save that. Okay, and what we're going to do right now is we're actually going to create a physical database based on this model. But before we do that, I'd like to ask you to take a screenshot, okay, of this window. Take a screenshot of this. Okay, and save that screenshot off somewhere. And I'd actually like to ask you to go back into the MySQL Model tab. Okay, and I'd like to ask you to take a screenshot of this tab as well. And now you can see our 2 tables are there, right? In the school schema, we have 2 tables. And by the way, a schema is another name for a database. Okay, so 2 screenshots. One of this window and the other of this window. Okay, so now what we're going to do is underneath of database, we're going to select database. We're going to select this option. It's called forward engineer. So go up to database and then forward engineer. Okay, we're going to have a series of windows where we basically next through all of them. Okay, so you're just going to next through all of these windows. You might be prompted to input that password again, so I hope you remembered it. And then we're going to continue nexting through the windows. Okay, and what has happened at this point is a physical database for this physical database model has been created in MySQL. Okay, so now we're going to go and we're going to access it. Okay, we're going to go under the tab that says local instance. Okay, and underneath of schemas, right now you probably see three schemas, three databases. One says Sequila, one says Test, and one says World. Well, what I want you to do, there's a button besides schema that has arrows, circular arrows. I want you to push that button. And what that does is it refreshes the databases that are viewed in the tool. And you should have one now for school. You should see one for school. Okay, I'd like you to open that up. And underneath of tables, I'd like you to open up the tables, and you should have two, one for advisor and one for student. And I'd like you to take a screenshot of this now. Okay, take a screenshot of the screen. Okay, so that physical database model that we created, we forward engineered it to create a physical database, and here's the physical database with its tables. Okay, so take a screenshot of this. Save it off somewhere. Now what we're going to do is we're going to select this advisor table, highlight it, do a right click, and from within the pop-up that appears, select the first option. It says select rows. Select that. Okay. And there's nothing that's going to appear. I mean, you are going to get a tab that pops up like this, an advisor tab, and it's going to, at the top you're going to see something that says select star from school.advisor, and then down below you're going to have this table-like view of the table. It'll say advisor ID, advisor first name, advisor last name, but everything's going to say null, null, null. That means there's no data in the table yet. Well, what we're going to do now is we're going to populate some data in the table. So click into the advisor ID column and type in a value of 1, and then tab over into the advisor first name. You can type in a first name, and then tab into the advisor last name and type in a last name, and then you can keep tabbing. We can type in another advisor ID, an advisor first name, and an advisor last name. Okay, and then what we can do is there's a button called apply. We can push that apply button, and what's going to happen is that data is going to be physically inserted into the table. Okay, so we can close this advisor tab. We can go underneath of schemas on the left hand side of MySQL Workbench. We can select the advisor table again, and then from within the pop-up that appears, select that top option for select rows, and now you can see we have 2 rows of data populated in the table. Okay, so I'd like you to take a screenshot of this screen now too, with the data populated in the table, and save that off somewhere. Okay, and this concludes the intro assignment. I hope everything went smoothly for you. If it didn't, please reach out to me. Please contact me, let me know, and we'll get things up and running for you. Like I said, hopefully it went smoothly for you. Now what you're going to do is you're going to submit all of your screenshots that you've taken and you've saved somewhere. You're going to submit your visual paradigm file, and don't forget that's going to be saved underneath of your documents. There's going to be a folder for VP projects. If you double click into that folder, you should see your .vpp file, which we named school. You're going to want to submit that. Okay, and then you're also going to want to submit the MySQL Workbench file that we created, and we saved that under C. I did, at least, on my C drive, underneath of Chestnut Hill. If I scroll down, there it is, school.mwb. Remember, the MySQL Workbench files are saved with a .mwb extension. So here it is, school.mwb. You want to submit that, and you want to submit your visual paradigm file. And remember, they're saved with a .vpp extension. So 3 things: your MySQL Workbench file, your visual paradigm file, and all of your screenshots. Okay? Thanks a lot.